Just as a brief reminder and summary, and it's important to understand this particular passage that we hear today, but for several weeks prior, probably about 3 weeks I think it was, we had been reading parables from Matthew's Gospel. Parables are little short stories, teaching tools that Jesus uses in order to drive home a larger point. 3 weeks ago was a story of the man who had 2 sons and told them both to go out and to work in his vineyard. One son said, "Sure, I'll go," but then did not do so. The other son said, "No, I'm not going to go," but then felt guilty about that and did go. The following week was a story of a person who had several vineyards, and he had tenants who farmed them. And when it came time for the harvest, he sent his servants to collect the harvest, and the tenants mistreated the servants. Some they just kind of beat up and maltreated, and eventually they even killed some of them, including the vineyard owner's own son, who was sent to collect the produce. And last week was the parable of the king who had a banquet for his son who got married, and when he invited his closest friends, they all just sort of begged him off. I don't really want to come, I got other things to do, some went to their farm, some went to their business, and they refused to even show up. And so he found others to come and to share the banquet. Now, what ties all 3 of those parables together is that who they are addressed to. Normally, parables are addressed to crowds of people, the vast majority of anybody who is listening, but in these particular instances, those particular stories were addressed to Pharisees and the elders and the chief priests, the religious leaders of the day. And the point that Jesus was making was that you're not doing your job. You're not fulfilling your responsibilities. And because you're not, the Lord is going to find others to take up the mantle where you are failing. Now, that's a critique. That's a criticism. And a natural human inclination when we are critiqued is sometimes we become pretty defensive, and we, in a sense, kind of fight back. We resist that. We don't necessarily like being told that we're doing something wrong. So that kind of sets up what we hear today. What we hear today are 2 different groups, Pharisees and Herodians, again, leaders of the day, who decide, in a sense, to kind of counterattack on Jesus. And they use the very, combustible topic of taxation. Now, taxes are something that are a reality of life. We have to pay taxes, because we want certain services in our society. We want roads. As we drive down the road, we want a place in order for us to drive our car. We need to have, certain basic services like water and sewage. We need police protection. We need fire protection, all those different things. And individually, alone, we cannot afford those things. We can't afford to hire our own private security system, security force to protect us and to go with us wherever we go. We can't afford to hire our own fire department in order to take care of just our property. But collectively, as a group, as a society, that's something that we do together, and we share the expense. That's the whole point of paying taxes. Now, this is not a discussion of do we pay too much or too little. That's a different topic altogether. It's just the basic premise and notion of why we pay taxes. It's no different than in Jesus' day. People paid taxes for basic services. Certainly they didn't have the services like we have today, but there were certain things that the community needed in common to which you had to pay taxes in order for it to function. But additionally, there was this additional tax that people in Jesus' day had to pay called the census tax. Now, a census is a count. We have a census in our country every 10 years. The government comes through and counts us, and they do so for the purposes of demographics, but also representation and various other reasons. But in Jesus' day, anyone who was 14 years old or older was counted, and that there was a tax that was imposed on each person that was not given to the local government, but was given to Caesar. Caesar is the Roman emperor. The Romans had invaded the land in which Jesus lived and moved about 300 years before he was born, and they imposed their own system of taxes on the Israelite people as well. Now, these are taxes that did not directly benefit the Israelites because they went to pay for the armies of Caesar so he could invade other places. So really, it was a foreign tax. It'd be no different than somebody coming in and collecting money from us and sending it, for example, to the government of Canada. We wouldn't like that very much at all. We'd probably rebel pretty strongly if something like that were to happen. So the question is rather loaded that the Pharisees and the Herodians ask. Is it lawful to pay the census tax to Caesar or not? That's the pushback, the counterattack, if you will. Now, if Jesus says it is lawful, you have to pay it, well, people aren't going to like that because they don't like paying this tax. And so therefore, these crowds of people that he's gathering and are coming and hearing and hanging on every word, they're going to be like, what? Are you kidding me? This guy's a farce. We're not going to listen to him anymore if he thinks that we have to pay that tax to a foreigner. There's no way. The scribes and the Pharisees, well, their duty is done. But however, also, if he says it is lawful or it is not lawful to pay that tax, you don't have to pay it. All they have to do is go running to the Romans and say, this guy's a traitor. He says they don't have to, people do not have to pay the census tax. He's inciting a riot. Well, what happens to traitors? You know, they get arrested and probably put to death. Again, problem solved. So the scribes and the Pharisees think that, well, this is easy. We can just get rid of this guy. He's been critiquing us and criticizing us, and we'll just get rid of him. And so they're, in a sense, they're trying to back Jesus into a corner. But Matthew reminds us and says he knew the malice in which they asked that question, so he, in a sense, kind of turned it back around. Well, whose image is on the coin? Well, the image is Caesar. Well, then it must belong to him. Give it to him. But also at the same time, you religious leaders need to give back to God what belongs to God. That's where the challenge comes in for us. What belongs to God? Well, really everything does. We would not be here right breathing and living if it were not for the Lord. So we owe the Lord really everything. And an appreciation of that is important for us to give thanks to God for what we have. We're kind of people of possession, you know, we like